Hello everybody, how are you all doing? Nice to see you again. Sorry it hasn't been quite as regular in terms of updates as I promised, but school holidays, it's really always quite difficult to find the time. But I'm back with another instalment from Devil's Engine Hellraisers. Basically, all hell has started to break loose. We've got Marlowe expelled from school, just got caught up in this whole firefight with demons and this group of people who've kind of tried to recruit him, including Pan, this girl, and Herc, this older guy who seems to run things, and another guy, Ostime, think for a minute there, who is like the one in charge. We haven't met him yet. You'd only really speak to him on the phone. And Marlowe has just told this group of people that he doesn't want to work for them. Not surprisingly, really, given the fact that there are demons. And he's heading back to school to try and find his friend Charlie, to try and kind of just say, what on earth is going on? And he got arrested. This group rejected him with alcohol to try and add or take away credence of his story, basically. Yeah. So the police found him. The police were like, "Are you drunk?" And he was like, "Yeah, but there's demons," and they didn't believe him. So anyway, for those of you who are listening, this chapter is called Ghosts. Oh, and Marlowe, when he was heading home from the police station, he kind of felt this presence and saw this girl who he thought he recognised. But yeah, we don't know who that is. Ghosts. Marlowe stood outside Victor G. Roseman High School in the sweltering heat, trying to work out why he felt so lost. Because you've got nowhere to go, his brain told him. Nobody wants you. The words stung, but only because they were true. This place had kicked him out, and his mum would happily trade him for the son that she'd lost 10 years ago, Danny. Danny may have been dead, but Marlowe was the ghost. Even here, people streamed past him like they couldn't see him, nobody so much as acknowledging his presence. Except one. The merest glimpse of a familiar face, the same girl half lost in the crowd, then gone before Marlowe could make sense of it. Hold it together, man, he told himself. He wanted to find Charlie, if only to prove that he still existed. He needed someone to talk to try to make sense of everything that had happened. Things may have been about as crap as they could be, but Charlie would crack a joke and they would laugh, and at least he'd feel like a real person again. Besides, however bad his life was, Charlie's had been worse, and there was nothing like perspective to make you feel a little less sorry for yourself. With no cell, though, he needed to fetch him in person. He pulled his inhaler from his pocket and squeezed 2 shots into his mouth, grimacing against the bitter taste. His lungs crackled and he rubbed his chest until they eased. Then he walked across the road to the locked gates. He jabbed his thumb against the intercom button. Seconds later, the school receptionist answered. I'm late, sorry, I need to get in. Name? Charlie Alvarez? There was a pause. Then the gates buzzed and he pushed his way through. He decided against the lobby and cut around the side of the main building. He entered through the fire door that never latched properly, clattering up the stairwell and along an empty corridor. He had to peer into 3 classrooms before he found the right one. Charlie was sitting in the middle of the room, lost in a daze, pen between his teeth. Marlowe knocked softly, then pushed open the door. Everybody turned to him, and Charlie's eyes just about popped free from his head. The teacher, Marlowe couldn't remember her name, folded her arms across her chest. "You're not supposed to be here," she said. "Yeah," he replied, scratching his head. About that. You don't have to worry, it's all sorted. Mr. Caputo apologised to me, actually commissioned me to decorate the rest of his car." "Nice try," she said. "Now leave. You know what happens when you're on school premises without permission?" By the time she'd finished, Charlie was out of his seat and halfway across the room. "I'd better go and see what the trouble is," he said as he reached the door. She protested some more, but Charlie just flashed her one of his grins and closed the door behind him. "What the hell, dude?" he said, grabbing Marlowe's arm and hauling him down the corridor. "Where have you been?" "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," Marlowe replied, leaning in close and keeping his voice low. Charlie reeled back, waving his hand in front of his face. "Wouldn't believe you? Jesus, Marlowe, I can smell it. You could fuel a goddamn power station with those fumes." "It's not..." Marlowe covered his mouth self-consciously. "It's not what it looks like, Charlie. I was drugged." "What?" "By these guys. They injected me with alcohol." He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. Nothing was making sense up there. The last couple of days a storm of dreamlike half-memories. Charlie's eyebrow just about shot off the top of his head. "They injected you with whiskey. Are you okay? Did they..." Marlowe realised what he was asking. No way, dude. It's because I saw something. I was there, at the hospital." "The one the terrorists blew up," Charlie said. "What?" It's all over CNN, man. The cops got there before they could do too much damage. Some wacko cell is claiming responsibility. You're saying terrorists made you get drunk? No, wait. Marlowe looked back, saw the demons ripping themselves from the walls, the girl with the hole in her heart. That's not what happened. They weren't terrorists. He heard a door opening, the hammer of distant footsteps. There were these people and these, I don't know, creatures, I guess. Creatures. Charlie actually took a step back. Listen, Marlowe, I don't know what you've been on, but I'm not on anything, he spat back. Charlie spluttered out a sigh. Look, I get it, Marlowe. This is how you deal with things. You burn up and take off. But you've got to get it under control, dude. I'm serious. You sound crazy. I'm not crazy, he started, and he would have said more if the intercom hadn't fizzled to life. Please listen carefully, said a voice that Marlowe recognised instantly as the principal's. The school is currently in lockdown. We request that all students remain inside their classrooms. Staff, this is a code orange. Please ensure that all doors are secured. What's going on? Marlowe said. What's a code orange? I have no idea, Charlie replied, but I'm guessing it's you. Me? The sound of footsteps grew louder, and the door at the end of the corridor exploded outwards, the giant shape of Yogi lumbering through as fast as his fat legs would get him. It only took him a second to see Marlowe, and when he did, he started fumbling at the taser on his belt. Yeah, said Charlie. I'm pretty sure it's you. Stop! Yogi roared, ripping the weapon from its holster. His other hand held a radio. He's in East Wing, level 2, no weapon in sight. Weapon? Marlowe said, frowning. Yogi was jogging towards them, everything jiggling. What's he talking about? I have no idea, Charlie replied, backing away, but if I were you, I'd start running. He didn't need to be told twice, sprinting after Charlie towards the far end of the corridor. They burst through the double doors, skidding around the corner into the stairwell. Caputo must have seen Marlowe entering the gates, probably thought he was here for payback. He didn't blame him. Victor G. Rosemount was the kind of place where payback could be brutal. Where are you going? He asked Charlie, feeling the monster start to squeeze its fingers around his throat. And why are you running? Charlie grinned back at him. It's got to be more exciting than geography, right? They punched through the doors at the bottom of the stairs, running out into the main school corridor. Yogi was still behind them, grunting like an injured bear, and Marlowe took the lead, splitting right, heading towards the way out. He smashed through the final set of fire doors into the lobby, the sun so bright there that it was like a flashbang going off in his face. He slammed into something big, spinning to a halt and panting for breath. 2 school cops stood between him and the way out. They weren't as big as Yogi. Nobody was as big as Yogi. But there were tasers in their hands and murder in their eyes. Marlowe froze, lifting his arms over his head in surrender. Charlie flapped to a halt beside him, his sneakers squeaking on the floor. Yogi appeared behind them, growling, at the same time that Caputo stepped out of his office door. You shouldn't have come back, Marlowe, the principal said, hovering behind one of the guards. You have just violated your contract with the school and broken the law. The city police have been notified. Whoa, Marlowe said, coughing out phlegm. Don't give yourself an aneurysm. I just came to see him. He tipped his head at Charlie. Yeah, sure, the man sneered. His lips moved as he carried on speaking, but Marlowe didn't hear it. His head suddenly full of noise. It was a sound like breaking china, as though somebody was walking across broken glass. He clamped his hands to his ears, gritting his teeth against it. What is that? He said, or maybe didn't. Caputo's face was turning red, the principal jabbing a finger at him, his words drowned out by that infernal noise. Behind him the school doors opened. Marlowe glanced up, squinting against the pane, against the light, to see the girl walk in, the one he'd seen outside the cop shop, the one who'd followed him here. A girl he didn't know, but who seemed so familiar. Hello, Marlowe, she said, smiling right at him. And that's when all hell broke loose. Next chapter is called Crazy Stupid. We've got definite fluctuations in the reality continuum. Pan sighed, looking over her shoulder at Herc. He was sitting at a bank of computers in the back of the van, his scarred forehead furrowed as he focused on a stream of data on one of the monitors. She put her hands behind her head, struggling to stay awake in the stream of golden light that poured through the windshield. You know, Herc, she said, the fact you say stuff like that is one of the reasons nobody likes you. I thought everybody liked me, he said, pouting. I'm the life and soul of the party. You couldn't be the life and soul of the party if the party was full of demons, she said. Then, when he didn't reply, because demons don't have lives or souls. Pan, it isn't really a joke if you have to explain it, he said, smudging a palm across the screen as if he could somehow change what was written there. Seriously though, we've got a hit. What do you think? Pan reluctantly got to her feet and moved to the back of the van. She sat next to Herc, staring at the lines of code and trying not to go cross-eyed. It was hopeless. She could read ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics? Yeah. Better than she could read the data pumped out by the lawyers. I have absolutely no idea, Herc, she said. She knew what he'd found, though. Tiny inconsistencies in the fabric of the world. Cracks in the code is how the lawyers always described them. They were a sign an engineer was close by. When you used the engine, it basically took a sledgehammer to physics, smashing a great big hole into reality. Those holes were like a homing beacon, if you knew how to look for them. How many, she asked. I can't tell, Herc said. The data's off. 2, maybe, possibly more. Great. 2 enemy engineers, at least. That could be bad. The trouble was, you never knew what their powers were until you saw them. Or didn't see them, if that's what they traded for. Invisibility was always popular. You didn't know whether you'd be facing up to super strength, supersonic speed, the ability to blow fire out your ass, or the big one, of course, invulnerability. But the contract for that was a nightmare to break, so only idiots and crazy people went for that. Yeah, and which one are you, she said to herself. Shut up, she told her brain. What? Said Herc, pouting again. Nothing. She stood up, yawning as she paced the length of the van and back. She felt like she could sleep for a week, and she would have done if someone could guarantee that there would be no nightmares. Oh, this is a bad idea anyway. Why would they even care about him? About Marlowe? Because he's seen us, because they think he'll be able to lead them to Ostheim, give them something to work with. Pan snorted. Ostheim was way too clever for that. They were always moving, always hiding. This war had been raging for decades and they'd never been found. Marlowe could tell them everything he knew, everything he'd seen, and it wouldn't do the Circulus Inferni any good. All they'd find is an empty high-rise in Manhattan. And remind me again why we're here, she asked, examining her filthy fingernail. See if we can't lure some of them into a trap, take out a couple of the enemy, even up the odds a little. Tit for tat, just like always. You kill some of the enemy kills some of you, and the demons just sit there waiting for a chance to drag everybody down to hell. Maybe she should have taken Ostheim's offer of escape. They're never going to show up, she said. The kid's not a big enough target. The words were barely out of her mouth before the radio squawked and Truck's voice boomed through. He and Nightingale were 3 streets up on lookout duty. We've got movement here, by the school. Yeah, Pan said. You getting some fluctuations in the reality continuum of your bowels? No joking, Pan. I've got a bad feeling. I think something big's about to go down. Your fat ass, she wanted to say. Before she could get the chance, a squealing hiss of static erupted through the speakers. She clamped her hands to her ears as Herc wrenched the volume down. Truck, you there? Just static. Ah, God damn it. Herc clambered behind the wheel and fired up the engine. Pan just had time to grab hold of the rail before it roared into the street. We're eyes only on this one, Pan. Hear me? Herc said. It was good advice. Without a contract, she'd be as vulnerable as it was possible to be out there. An engineer could crack her open with just a thought. I mean it. Do not do anything crazy or anything stupid. She reached back with her spare hand, felt the crossbow there, praying she wouldn't have to use it, but knowing she would. Crazy or stupid, Pan? She asked herself as they skidded around a corner, accelerating hard. Probably both. When all hell breaks loose. It's so hot today. Beautiful summer day. When all hell breaks loose. The girl smiled again, and Marlowe almost screamed. It was a friendly smile, like they were old friends, like they were the only 2 people in the room. But there was something just beneath it, something sharp and dangerous, like a razor hidden by icing sugar. She was still dwarfed by her huge jacket, her mousy hair falling in tangled curls. Even in the dazzling light of the lobby, her eyes seemed to glow, too big, too bright. Marlowe's gut tightened, that same wave of nausea bubbling up from deep inside him. Something felt wrong. Something felt really wrong. The girl walked across the lobby, pushing past the guards and the principal like they didn't exist. Caputo frowned at her. Excuse me, what do you think you're doing? She didn't reply, those big, moon-bright eyes never leaving Marlowe. Caputo reached out, grabbed hold of her coat. "You have no right. I'm asking you to..." The words dropped from his lips in clumps, his eyes bulging like something inside his skull was pushing them out. He put a finger down his collar and tugged at it as if he was standing inside a furnace. "You," Caputo said, gulping. He was shaking now, like he was on the verge of a seizure. You... Hey, Vince," said Yogi. "Are you okay?" Caputo didn't reply. He just collapsed against the wall, shaking like a broken machine, saying that one word over and over. Yogi and the other guards had run to him, one of them calling for help on his radio. The girl ignored them all, still smiling at Marlowe. His guts did another somersault with every step she took, like she had unravelled them and was using them as a red carpet. Charlie must have sensed something too, because he grabbed Marlowe's arm. "Dude," he said quietly, "this is weird." "I said hello, Marlowe," said the girl. She took another step forward and the air around her seemed to shimmer, giving the illusion that her feet weren't touching the ground. It had to be the heat, right? But could the weather be blamed for the way her words seemed to ricochet around the room like bullets, making his ears ring? "I know you," he said. "I've been looking for you," she replied. She didn't so much as blink as she walked across the lobby, but her smile grew even wider. Her teeth looked small and sharp. It was a shark's smile. "Lady, you're going to have to go through my secretary," he said, but he took a step back as he did so, hitting the wall. "This won't hurt," she said, and her words buzzed inside his ears, like there was a wasp trapped in there. "What won't?" Marlowe asked. She sailed closer, still moving without really walking. Her eyes were growing alongside her smile, becoming as fat and bright as headlights. His headache was growing more painful by the second, needled feet walking across the flesh of his brain. His mouth was full of the taste of copper. "Marlowe?" Charlie's voice was quiet, as though he was speaking from the other side of the school, or Marlowe had cotton wool in his ears. "Dude, your nose." Marlowe put his fingers to his face, and they came away red. Blood pattering down onto his t-shirt, onto his sneakers. "Relax," the girl was saying, or not saying. "I'm just going to open you up, see what's inside. You have something we need." She was a dozen yards away now, still gliding. Her hands flexed in the air in front of her, and each time one of her fingers moved, Marlowe felt like a blasting cap had been detonated inside his head. Visions flashed up with each explosion, too bright and too real. The hospital parking lot, the demons, and her, Pan. Marlowe groaned, putting his hand to his head, feeling like his mind was about to start slopping out of his nose along with the blood. "Hey!" yelled one of the cops. "What the hell's going on? Get away from him!" Marlowe felt Charlie's fingers tighten around his arm, tugging. He let himself be pulled, taking a step down the corridor towards the fire doors. "Where are you going, Marlowe?" the girl said. She reached out and took hold of his shirt, pulling him close, those eyes burning more fiercely than the sun. He struggled against her, hearing the police demanding to know what was going on, hearing Charlie shout his name, but all of it was drowned out by the girl's voice in his head, those bone-breakingly loud whispers. "Don't be afraid, Marlowe. The pain will be over soon. It will all be over soon." The memories flashed by without his permission, as if he was watching a movie inside his head. He saw things he didn't even remember, staggering out of the office tower, so drunk he couldn't stand straight, looking up at the window where he could almost make out Pan's face, watching him go, vomiting over a police car as they tried to bundle him inside. The girl's eyes flicked back and forth like she was watching it all, like she was reading his mind. It was too much. Too much. "No!" Marlowe cried, lashing out, shunting the girl away. She grunted, the visions in his head vanishing so fast that for a second he couldn't see anything at all. Something in her expression dropped away like a mask, her eyes suddenly normal, her smile wiped clean. "That's enough," yelled Yogi, moving towards the girl. "What are you doing here?" The girl closed her eyes, scrunched up her face, put her fingers to her temple like she was trying to remember where she'd left her keys. "You need to get the hell out," Yogi said, reaching out for the girl with one fat hand. Then Caputo started screaming. It was a noise unlike anything Marlowe had ever heard, a savage, brutal shriek that filled the entire lobby. Everyone turned to the principal as he pushed himself up from the wall, his movements jerky. He screamed again, spraying spittle, and started to run towards Yogi, building up speed. "Hey!" was all the big guy had a chance to say before Caputo leapt on him. His wiry arms clamped onto the cop's big, bald head, his legs wrapped around his waist. Yogi staggered, trying to wrestle the man off him, but Caputo looked possessed. He raised a hand and punched Yogi right in the side of the head. The noise was like somebody shooting a watermelon, a wet crack that echoed off the walls. He punched him again, and this time his knuckles came away red. "Christ!" yelled one of the other school cops, running into the fray. Yogi and Caputo looked like they were locked in some kind of dance. Then the big guy's legs gave out beneath him and they both crumpled to the floor. Caputo was still punching, staving in the side of Yogi's head, blood and bones it's a bit gross, blood and bones spraying across the lobby. He was grinning like a madman, shrieking with glee as he bent down and bit into the gaping wound. Marlowe heard the clack of teeth against bone, and he almost screamed too. One cop shot his taser, the principal's entire body shuddering, blood spraying from his mouth. He lay there, out cold, twitching. The other cop was trying to yell something into his radio. "We're nearly there," said the girl. And Marlowe felt as if she had an ice cream scoop inside his head, digging into the tender meat of his brain. Just a little more. "Oh, screw this," Charlie almost shrieked, and suddenly the girl was staggering back again, holding her nose. Charlie bounced on his heels, his small fist bunched. He moved in for another punch, but the girl opened her mouth and shrieked, "Patrick, I need you!" The entire lobby shuddered, as though an earthquake had just hit. The windows imploded, a crack tearing its way across one wall. A cloud of dust billowed down from the ceiling, diffusing the sunlight and making the air swim like an ocean of gold. Marlowe grabbed hold of Charlie to stop himself toppling. The room shook again. It was filled with so much dust that it took Marlowe a second to notice there was one more person in the lobby. A guy stood right next to the girl. Late teens maybe, blonde hair, or dressed all in black. The third cop levelled his taser at the new guy and pulled the trigger. The two electrified wires burying themselves into the boy's neck. They sparked once, but the guy didn't even seem to feel it. The wires glowed red hot, a bolt of electricity snaking into the cop's hand and sending him flying into the wall. The taser dropped to the floor and erupted into flame, the plastic bubbling. Smoke curled upwards, and suddenly the school was full of noise as the fire alarm triggered. Marlowe tried to run, but he couldn't move. The dust and smoke was aggravating his lungs, making each breath a long, panicked wheeze. He felt Charlie pulling his arm, but nothing was responding the way it should. "I haven't finished with you yet," said the girl's voice in his skull. She reached out and he could feel her fingers there, plunging into his memories, filling his thoughts with pain. He tried to shake her away, but he was rooted tight, like he was a puppet and she had hold of his strings. All he could do was watch as the guy in black lifted his hand once again. The cop vanished with a concussive thump, the whole lobby shaking with the force of it. The policeman on the floor was back on his feet and he swung a punch at the boy. There was another pop and the kid vanished. The cop's punch hit nothing but air and the man spun around in a circle, tripping over Yogi's body and landing on his face with a meaty crunch. Then Patrick was there again, blinking back into existence. He twitched his fingers and the man's flailing body exploded in a blinding flash. "Where are they hiding?" the girl asked, pulling Marlowe's attention back to her. Her eyes were big and bright once again. "Tell me." "I don't know what you mean," Marlowe said, feeling like his whole body was bound by invisible ropes, his lungs full of sawdust. "I don't know anything." The door at the far end of the lobby opened, a stampede of students spilling out, heading for the fire exits. Those at the front took one look at the chaos and tried to stop. The girl flinched, her attention wavering as she looked over her shoulder. Marlowe felt the chains loosen, just a crack, but enough to let him move. He ripped his mind free, turning and bolting. His legs were like jelly, like this was the first time he'd ever used them, and he almost fell, but Charlie was by his side, hauling him along. "No!" came the girl's voice, and he felt her fingers inside his head again, felt his body start to seize up. Then they plunged into the crowd, drowning in a river of limbs. Even past the screams, Marlowe could hear her. "Patrick, we can't lose him!" There was another thump, a channel of warm air flowing over them. Screams. The flow of people changed, everyone pushing back the way they'd come and dragging Marlowe with them. He lost sight of Charlie, called his name, but all he heard in return was the girl. "Marlowe," she said, her voice distant now, like a badly tuned radio. "Marlowe, don't you dare run." Then she was gone. Marlowe passed an open door and he ploughed through the crowd towards it, squeezing into a classroom. There were half a dozen younger students there, cowering in the corner. Somebody had opened a window and was halfway out, casting a nervous look back before disappearing. "Go!" he wheezed at the rest, scattering them. He looked back at the crowd raging past the door. Charlie was there, pushing and punching his way through the melee until he was close enough to hold out a hand. Marlowe grabbed it, hauling him in like he was dragging him out of quicksand. They staggered into the classroom together, Charlie panting and Marlowe gasping. "What the hell is going on, Marlowe?" Charlie asked. The room trembled, an aftershock strong enough to send chairs and tables skittering across the floor. "Seriously, dude, what the hell?" "I told you, some weird stuff went down yesterday," Marlowe replied. He pulled out his inhaler, using it 4 times and feeling the panic subside as the hot, dusty air was channeled into his lungs. The relief didn't last long. The room shook again, the windows shattering. Marlowe shielded his head with his arms, feeling blades of glass embed themselves in his skin. "Marlowe!" When he opened his eyes again, the boy called Patrick was right in front of him. Wrapping a gloved hand around Marlowe's throat, he leaned in, snarling. "My sister has one way of interrogating people," he said. "I have another." Patrick grunting in pain as a chair exploded over his back. Then Charlie's scrawny arms were around the guy's neck, dragging him away. Marlowe didn't hesitate, throwing a punch. It was badly aimed, glancing off Patrick's cheek. He threw another, this one connecting with the boy's nose. There was a brittle crack, and Patrick gargled in pain. Charlie was raining blows down onto his head and neck, trying to knock him down onto the floor. "Run!" he yelled at Marlowe. "I've got it!" There was a dull explosion, and Charlie was gone, the dust billowing in crazed circles as the air rushed into the space he'd just occupied. "No!" Marlowe said, just a choked cry. "Charlie? Charlie!" Patrick straightened his jacket, smudging blood over his face as he walked leisurely towards Marlowe. "Where is he?" Marlowe asked, backing away and bumping into a desk. "What did you do with him? I swear to God if you've hurt him." "You'll what?" Patrick said, advancing. "You'll run to Mummy?" Patrick's grin grew even wider. His was a shark's smile too, and Marlowe could suddenly see the resemblance to the girl. His sister. They had to be twins. He started, but Patrick's viper hand snapped out, fingers squeezing tight around Marlowe's throat. "That's enough," he growled. "Time to talk." Something outside seemed to catch his attention and he swore. There was a blinding flash of darkness, like an inverse starburst. Marlowe again felt like he was on a roller coaster, his stomach almost ripped out of his throat. He screwed his eyes shut against the sickening force of it, too scared to even scream. Then the world reformed around him, his body too heavy, like he was conscious of every bone, every muscle. He opened his eyes to see Patrick. The boy's face was worn and lined, his eyes pale like he'd aged 50 years in a flash. Behind him was the big, blue sky, no classroom in sight. Marlowe glanced left and then right, realising that he was on the roof of the school building. And when he peered over his shoulder, there was nothing but air between him and the parking lot 40 yards below. Vertigo hit him like a punch to the solar plexus, and he gulped air like a fish out of water. Only Patrick's hand around his throat was stopping him from falling, and he grabbed the boy's arms, holding them tight. "Last chance," Patrick said, the wind whipping his blonde hair into a frenzy. "Tell us what you know." "About what?" Marlowe said. "About them." "I don't know anything," he said, and Patrick straightened his arm, pushing Marlowe further over the edge. I swear they gave me something. I don't remember any of it." "Then you're no good to me," Patrick said. "No way," Marlowe yelled. There was the sound of a door opening, the pop of a gunshot. Then Patrick was gone, and Marlowe was falling. The next chapter is called Safety's Off. The van screeched to a halt so fast that Pan almost flew through the windshield. Outside, the school was in chaos, 100 kids or more scrambling out of the gates and swarming to safety. Even from inside the van, over the panicked cries, Pan could hear the ringing of an alarm. There was smoke too, rising from the main door. "There are definitely 2 engineers inside, and they're powerful," Herc said, his eyes still glued to the monitors. "Where the hell is Truck?" "Oh, he's probably taking a nap," she replied. Something hammered on the van door and Pan wrenched it open. A familiar fat face glowered back at her. "Truck, nice of you to turn up," she said. Wish I could say the same, he grunted, squeezing his obese frame halfway into the van, the whole vehicle tilting with his weight. Herc, we got 2 agents inside and they're blowing the place to hell. Do we engage? Engage, said Herc, nodding. Of course you should engage, you doofus. We get a chance to kick the circle where it counts here. Try to take one alive, okay? Truck nodded, his chins jiggling. Then he pushed away hard enough to make the van rock on its suspension. Pan watched him go. He didn't look like much for sure, but she could almost smell the engine's power inside him. Blood and iron, age and power. He would have gone for strength, the way he always did when he forged a contract. It was a safe bet. The lawyers had brokered that one so many times they could break it with their eyes closed. The big guy reached the gates, the kids backing away from him like they could sense something different, something wrong. A small figure danced up beside him, casting a nervous look back and lifting a hand to Pan in greeting. Nightingale. Pan didn't wave back. She just nodded at her. Knight would have gone for something else. Speed, maybe. It was impossible to tell until Pan saw her in action. She sat down, then pushed herself up again, pacing like a caged animal. Oh, God, she hated being out of contract, being human. The word caught in her craw, making her feel like choking. When she was human, she was weak, fragile, pathetic. The engine made her whole, made her real. With the engine, she wasn't human at all. She was something so much more. Being human didn't mean she had to sit here like a lemon, though. Don't, Herc said, squinting suspiciously at her. Don't what? Don't do whatever it is that you're thinking about doing, he said. Let Truck and Knight handle it, kiddo, or you'll be like a sitting duck out there, a duck with no legs or wings or superpowers. That's probably the worst analogy I've ever heard, she muttered back, sliding the crossbow out of the pouch on her back. She'd lost 3 bolts in the hospital parking lot, but she had 2 left, each one forged from the engine. They were designed to stop the demons in their tracks, but they did a pretty good job of putting holes in engineers too. Pan, I'm serious. Ostein would not want you out there. Oh, Ostein can kiss it, she said. You want to take down the enemy? You're going to need more than a fat guy in his shadow. Give me that. She nodded at the pistol, holstered at Herc's waist. He shook his head, but it was more in resignation than denial, because he popped the stud and held it out. Safety's off, he said. Just the way I like it, she grinned. Then, before he could say another word, she was out of the van. The sun was fierce, drumming on her skull as she raced across the street. People pushed past her, but she ignored them, crossing the parking lot, the pistol cocked in her right hand and the bow held tight in her left. There was a soft explosion, a set of windows to her left, detonating into shrapnel. She jogged towards them, seeing a classroom drenched in shadow. It was so dark inside that she could only make out an outline. No, 2 outlines, next to each other. That's enough, she heard one of them say. Time to talk. She lifted the gun, finger on the trigger. The man who'd spoken saw her, his eyes glinting in the dark. And a second later, both figures vanished, blasting out a shockwave of heat and air. Pan swore, jamming a finger to her collar radio. Contact, we've got a porter. It's Patrick Rabar. I've lost him. She looked right and left, waiting for them to reappear. Teleporters never went far. It was too draining, especially when they were carrying a passenger. There was another whump above her, and she backed away, staring up the huge brick tower that made up the corner of the school. There, at the top, over the clock face, a figure dangling precariously over the edge. Pan swore again, clambering through the window into the school, blinking the last of the sun out of her eyes. She bolted across a classroom into the corridor beyond. To the right was the lobby, and she could hear shouts inside. Truck's voice booming. She ignored it. The big guy could handle himself, cutting up a flight of steps, then another. The halls were deserted now, the fire alarm still screaming. She reached the top floor, her injured heart beating like a hummingbird's. Come on, she growled, running one way then doubling back, finding a door with clock stenciled on it. It was locked, but she aimed the pistol and fired off 4 shots, splinters of wood exploding. A solid kick forced it open, and she ran up 3 more flights of stairs, bursting through the door at the top. Patrick and Marla were there, dark silhouettes against the day. She squeezed the trigger, the pistol bucking in her fist. Too slow. Patrick blinked out of sight with another concussive thump, leaving Marlowe hanging there, his arms cartwheeling manically, his mouth open in an expression of terror as gravity reached up and grabbed him. Oh, leave him, her brain said. He's trouble. He knows too much. But before she could even acknowledge what her head was saying, she was halfway across the roof, diving like a fielder as the boy tumbled over the side. She skidded on her stomach, stretching as far as she could, thinking she'd missed him, before his hand caught hers. He felt like an anchor, his momentum pulling her over. She dug in everything she could, the nails of her other hand gouging into the dust and filth of the roof, catching the bricks and holding her. She screamed, the boy hanging from her arm, heavy enough to rip it from the socket like a turkey leg at Thanksgiving. Beneath them, people swarmed like insects, so far down. Marlowe struggled, swinging back and forth, his sneakers scuffing the brickwork as he tried to pull himself up. She couldn't hold him. No way. Oh, stupid, 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 she told herself, knowing that if she didn't cut him free, he was going to drag them both to their deaths. But his hands were on hers now, clinging like barnacles. He looked like he was having trouble breathing, his face turning purple. Let go, she grunted. No way, Marlowe shot back. Pull me up. She tried, the fingers of her left hand slipping on the roof, her body sliding closer to the edge. I can't, you have to let go. A current of warm air. Pan looked back to see Patrick reappear on the roof. He tucked a strand of long blonde hair behind his ear and grinned at her. That was stupid, Pan, he said. Pan tried to shake Marlowe loose, but his fingers were a vice around her wrist. She scanned the floor. The crossbow was by the stairwell door, the pistol closer, but she had no hands to reach with. Patrick knew it, too, walking closer, never taking his eyes off her. The irony is, we wanted him, he nodded over the edge at Marlowe, to get to you. We thought he might be able to lead us to where you were hiding. You're so damn good at hiding. He squatted next to her, picking up the pistol and studying it like it was the first time he'd seen one. But here you are. You plonked yourself right in the palm of my hand. He sniffed the air. And you don't even have a contract. Killing a kitten couldn't be easier. You'd know, Pan spat, fat beads of sweat dripping down her forehead into her eyes. She didn't blink, though. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing that she was afraid. What are you waiting for, anyway? Not got the guts to pull the trigger? Oh, I don't want you dead, he said, pointing the gun at her stomach. That would be a waste of an asset. I know how much information you've got in that pretty little head of yours. Oh, this was bad. It was better to die than let them take you, she told herself. They'll torture you, then kill you anyway. Let go. Just drop. 3 seconds, 4 at most, then it will all be over. She was out of contract. If she died now, then the demons could never take her. But she'd been too close to death too many times, and that gaping absence scared her almost as much as hell did. She tightened her grip on the bricks, the pain sharpening in her cramping fingers. Where's Ostheim? Patrick asked, pushing the barrel of the gun into her ribs. With your mum, she said. The boy laughed, but there was no humour in his cold blue eyes. He pushed the gun in further, his finger twitching on the trigger. Not good enough, he said. Yeah, that's what Ostheim said. Last chance, Pan. She laughed. Not because it was funny, but because she wouldn't be able to tell him even if she did know. She wouldn't be able to tell him even if she did know. That doesn't make any sense. She wouldn't be able to tell him even if she wanted to. That's what I should have written there. She had no idea where Ostheim was. Nobody did. Not even Ostheim knew where he was half the time. He travelled on a remote unit, never stopping for more than an hour, never broadcasting his location. It had been like that for as long as she'd been a Hellraiser. She'd never even met Ostheim. None of the engineers had. What better way to protect the guy at the top than to keep the whole operation blind? Fine, the boy said. All trace of a smile now wiped clean. You don't deserve to live anyway. One less piece of vermin in the world. Just remember, you... A streak of light blazed past, and Patrick's head lurched back with a crack. He toppled onto his ass, spitting blood, the gun clattering away. There was another splintering crunch as something hit Patrick in the mouth. The blur skidded to a halt, taking the slim shape of Nightingale. She was panting, out of breath, which wasn't surprising really, given she'd been running too fast to see. The boy was groaning, clutching his broken teeth. He lifted a hand, and Pan felt the air twist and bubble as he prepared to teleport Night, probably into the middle of a tree or 100 yards into the air. Night! Pan shouted, and the girl became a blur again, running in a circle around the roof and blasting up a whirlwind of dust. With a look of pure fury, Patrick snapped out of existence. Night reappeared as she stopped running, staggered, looked for a moment like she was about to pass out. Then she walked to the edge of the roof. She grabbed Pan's arm, pulling hard. Pan grimaced, swinging Marlowe up. The kid reached for the roof, missed, but on the second attempt he caught hold. She almost didn't have the strength to pull herself up, but Knight's skinny arms helped. She hauled her body onto the bricks and lay there for a moment, everything aching, feeling like she'd been stretched on the rack. You okay? Knight asked in her thick Spanish accent, which I'm not going to try and do. Yeah, fine, Pan said, pushing herself up with arms that felt like tissue paper. Thanks. De nada, Knight said, bouncing back and forth from one foot to the other. Nightingale couldn't stay still for more than a millisecond. Where'd that hijo de puta go? Porters, always cowards. Anyone want to tell me what's going on? Said Marlowe. He was sitting on the floor looking like he'd just gone 10 rounds with truck, his face drenched in sweat, his whole body trembling. He had his inhaler in one hand and was squeezing off shot after shot into his mouth. You drugged me, right? This is some kind of joke. Ha, yeah, you got us. So funny, she replied, deadpan. She turned to Nightingale. Where's Truck? Downstairs. Other one's a reader, but he knocked her out cold. A mind reader. Oh, they were brutal if they wanted to be. Could control your thoughts, could make you strangle your own mother, then run under a bus. Pan set off for the roof, across the roof, picking up the crossbow as she headed for the stairwell. That douche is probably ported down there. We'd better go help. She jammed a finger on her mic. Hey, Truck, you there? I think the porter's heading your way. There was a hiss of static in her ear, then Truck's voice. You think? Almost lost in the rumble of an explosion. Pan could feel it in her feet, like the whole school was about to collapse. She broke into a run. Hey, what about me? Marlowe yelled behind her. Stay here if you want, she shouted over her shoulder. But if you're planning on living out the day, I suggest you follow me. Yeah, we got time for another one, I think. Okay. The next chapter is called Fight, Fight, Fight. Marlowe scrabbled to his feet, wondering for a moment if his lungs had fallen out while he'd been hanging over the roof. He pumped 7 shots of his inhaler, but he was still struggling to breathe. Some situations were so bad that even Ventolin couldn't help. Yeah, like being thrown off the school tower by a guy who can teleport and then being saved by a girl who's just come back from the dead. His mind must have fallen out too, because he was pretty sure he'd lost it. He wasn't crazy enough to stay here by himself, though. The girl might have looked like she wanted him dead, but she'd risked her life to save him. The guy called Patrick had been about to homicide his ass. He set off after the girls, although the petite one seemed to have vanished again. He stumbled into the stairwell, clutching the banister hard because he didn't trust his shaking legs to hold him. By the time he reached the deserted ground floor hallway, he could hear noises spilling out of the lobby, shouts and something that might have been a gunshot or an explosion. He turned, ready to flee, only to thump into somebody running the other way. Hey, he yelled, panicking until he recognised Charlie's face. The relief of seeing him alive was almost overwhelming, and before he even knew what he was doing, he'd thrown himself at the boy, hugging him tight. What happened? Marlowe asked, once Charlie had squirmed loose. You disappeared. I have no idea, he replied. 1 minute I'm kicking the crap out of that guy, and the next I'm all the way up in the art room. Man, I blacked out or something. Something, Marlowe replied. With an almighty crack, the lobby doors blew off their hinges, tearing through a bank of lockers and cartwheeling down the hallway. Marlowe dived out of the way, looked up to see that all hell had broken loose in there. The lobby looked like it was burning up, flames licking the walls and an upside-down flood of thick black smoke billowing out. There were shapes in the chaos, forms that swept back and forth so fast and so erratically that they could have been made of shadow and smoke. Come on, said Charlie, we've got to get out of here. A burst of light burned its way into the hallway, and suddenly Patrick was there, just yards away, engulfed in a ball of fire. He managed to shrug off his coat before a blurred shape streaked out of the lobby and thumped into him. They crashed into the wall hard enough to crack the plaster. Through the dust, Marlowe could make out the girl from the roof, sitting on the guy's chest, her fists as fast as a pneumatic drill. Patrick managed to get a hand up, but the girl was too fast, disappearing into a fizzing silhouette of light. The wall behind her vanished, as if somebody had willed it out of existence. With a groan like a dying whale, the ceiling cracked and drooped, the windows blowing out in a hail of glass. Patrick struggled to his feet, barely sparing Marlowe a glance. He ran for the hole in the wall, but the girl blazed in front of him, tripping him and sending him sprawling. Then she was on his back, those hammer blows pummelling his face into the floor. Patrick growled and vanished, reappearing an instant later behind the girl. He looked exhausted, but he had enough strength to grab her around the neck, choking off her cry. She pushed herself back, sending them both flying into another bank of lockers, caving a hole in the metal. But he didn't let go, squeezing so hard her face was turning blue. Hey, Marlowe shouted, get off her! Patrick didn't even hear him. Marlowe started towards them, not sure what he was planning to do, but knowing he had to do something. The smoke from the lobby curled into his lungs like fingers. Marlowe, he heard Charlie behind him. You crazy? Come on! There was another explosion from the lobby, and Marlowe turned to see a man bulldoze his way out of the fire. He was huge, like bigger than Yogi huge, and he had a face like a bulldog that had swallowed a mouthful of bees. He bowled down the hallway, gaining momentum with every step. The big guy reached out with a fist the size of a catcher's mitt, engulfing Patrick's face and hoisting him up into the air. He threw the man like it was a ragdoll, hard enough to punch him through the doors at the far end. Then he crouched down beside the girl, who was recovering her breath. "You okay, Knight?" he asked in a voice that rolled like thunder. She nodded, letting him help her up. Both the guy and the girl turned and looked at Marlowe, dismissing him in a way that made him feel relieved and disappointed all at once. "I'll get Patrick," the guy said. "Go make sure Pan's all right." They split up, but only for a second. After a couple of steps, the big guy stopped walking, putting a hand to his head like he was in pain. He staggered, collapsing against the wall. Then he turned, lurching back the way he'd come. There was something different about his face, his mouth drooping, his eyes unfocused. And the way he walked reminded Marlowe of the old zombie films. It was almost comical, until he drew level with Knight and wrapped his tree trunk arms around her in a bear hug. She screamed as he lifted her off the floor, struggling against him. "Truck, stop! What are you doing?" "It's not," the big guy grunted. His nose was leaking blood. "It's not me." The girl was wriggling so furiously that she was just a blur again, like the guy was holding onto a mirage. It was making Marlowe's eyes hurt just to look at it. He backed off a step, feeling Charlie's hands around his arm, tugging him. The blonde girl emerged from the lobby. Her face was bruised, but her eyes were colder and more focused than ever. She was weaving her fingers in front of her like before, whispering something under her breath. What had Pan said up on the roof? That the girl was a reader. Each movement of her hands held an invisible string, like she was a puppet master and the big guy was her plaything. He squeezed and something inside Knight cracked like a pistol shot. "Kill her," the girl was saying. "Kill her, kill her, kill her." Marlowe shook Charlie loose, grabbing the first thing he could see, a fire extinguisher. He wrenched the pin out of the handle like it was a grenade, then fired it. A white plume of carbon dioxide jetted out of the end and filled the corridor. He tried not to breathe it in, but there was nothing he could do, the acrid taste filling his mouth, scouring his damaged lungs. He fired it again, marching forward and directing the flow right at the girl. She coughed, using a shoulder to wipe her watering eyes, but her hands were still working away, pulling trucks at strings. Marlowe hefted the fire extinguisher above his head and charged at her, ready to KO her out of the equation. He never got the chance. The girl suddenly cried out, collapsing onto one knee. She put her fingers to her shoulder and Marlowe could see some kind of arrow sticking out of her uniform, slick with her blood. Pan strode out of the lobby, reloading her crossbow as she went. "Truck, you okay?" she said as she walked, lifting the bow and aiming it at the mousy girl's head. Truck was looking at his hands like he no longer trusted them. The girl called Knight, now lying in a puddle of quivering limbs at his feet. Yeah, he said. "Sorry." Patrick's sister was trying to get back to her feet, one hand rising up, trembling like it belonged to an old woman. Marlowe felt a pang of agony lace across the front of his head, realised he was staggering down the corridor towards Pan, somebody else at the wheel. "No!" He barked the order at his brain and felt the girl's telepathic hold waver, not by much, but enough to let him wiggle free of it. He swung the extinguisher. It was a lucky shot, catching her in the temple and knocking her to the floor. She lay still, only the soft rise and fall of her chest letting him know he hadn't just become a killer. His weapon hit the floor with a clang and he reached for his inhaler, shaking it. There wasn't much left. Another bout of vertigo hit him, then he had to sit down on the ledge by the window to stop the world doing cartwheels. Charlie perched next to him, his face a mask of shock and disbelief, as if he'd just been pulled out of a car crash. Marlowe guessed his own face looked exactly the same, only it wasn't a car that had crashed, it was reality. Pan reached the girl and towed her with her boot to make sure she was unconscious. She grabbed the crossbow bolt and tugged it free with a spurt of blood. Wiping on her trousers, she slid it into her pocket, then held a hand out to Knight. "You good?" she asked, hauling the smaller girl up. "I'm fine," Knight wheezed, her voice a crone's cackle. She coughed, looking up at the big guy. "Not the first time he's got a little too friendly. Right, Truck?" "Hey," he said with a sheepish shrug. "What can I say? I'm a hugger." He looked over his shoulder towards the far end of the corridor. "We've still got one loose and he'll be..." "Yeah, I thought so." All eyes turned to see Patrick stagger back through the doors. He looked like he'd been hit by a train, one arm hanging by his side, too loose, probably dislocated, the other feeling its way along the wall. Pan stepped to the front of the group, aiming her crossbow at him. It would have to be a good shot from here, maybe 20 yards between them. Let Brianna go, Patrick said, spitting out something that might have been a tooth. Don't you dare. Dare what? Pan said, swinging the crossbow back until it was pointed right at the girl's head. Kill her? Why not? You were going to kill me? Kill us? Patrick staggered forward a few more paces, grimacing. His good hand was flexing, but whatever magic he'd possessed before seemed to have dried up. He stopped halfway down the corridor. She's my sister, he said, almost pleading. Give her back and we'll go, I promise. Too late, Pan replied. You play the game, you take the pain. You can go, but she stays with us. Please, he said. Pan tilted her head, like something had buzzed into her ear. She brushed at it with her free hand. Marlowe could feel it too, a soft hum deep inside his skull, like when you could hear the subway rumbling through the grates. He shook his head, trying to ignore the sensation of something crawling inside his brain. You got 3 seconds, Pan said. Get out of my sight or I swear to whoever built the engines, I'll put a bolt right through her head. 1. Patrick must have seen something in her expression because he straightened, his eyes so full of hate that they didn't look human. He pointed a finger at Pan and she shook her head in a warning. She said, her head still twitching in discomfort. That's 2. Brianna, I'll come back for you, I promise, he said, almost in tears. Then, to Pan, you'll pay for this. She snorted a bitter laugh. Yeah, we'll all pay for this. God damn it, what is that? The sensation was getting stronger, a tremor that seemed to fill up the whole corridor. What little glass was left in the windows was rattling, the rest trembling across the floor like a river of ice. It was more like a subway than ever, like there was a train hurtling their way. Only whatever was coming was worse than a train. Marlowe could feel it in his gut, a sickness born of fear, some primal instinct demanding that he run, and never stop. Everybody seemed to be feeling it, whatever it was. Pan and her friends casting nervous looks at each other. Marlowe glanced at Charlie, but he was wearing a 1,000-yard stare, lost in the horror of the last 20 minutes. Patrick started to back away. Then his hand shot up to his head, clutching it like he was trying to stop it popping off his shoulders. He seemed to go 3 shades paler in as many seconds. No, he muttered, staggering back. No, please, not yet, not yet, no. He looked at Pan, and this time his expression was one of pure horror. Get my sister out of here, please, he yelled. He turned so quickly he almost tripped on his own feet, pushing through the doors, his shrieks echoing back to them down the corridor. He's coming! He's coming! He's coming! His fear was contagious. Marlowe's skin growing cold, his scalp tightening. He stood up, turning to Pan. She too was shaking her head, and when she looked back at him her eyes were wide and full of fear. Herc, she said, speaking into the radio on her collar, please tell me he's wrong. She listened to her reply and collapsed against the ruined bank of lockers. The whole school seemed to be shaking now, like a giant steamroller was about to crush the building into dust. There was more buzzing inside Marlowe's skull, 1,000 blue bottles feasting on his brain. What's going on? He asked. Pan? She pushed herself off the lockers, stumbling away, her eyes never leaving Marlowe's. He's coming, she said, her voice that of a child who hears something beneath her bed in the middle of the night. She looked about half her age, a little lost girl. Oh God, he's coming. Who? Asked Marlowe. The ceiling cracked overhead, filling the corridor with billowing clouds of dust, like it too needed to find a way out fast. Pan, who? Him, she said, the word just a sob. Maman. Uh-oh. I'll do one more, because I think that'll take us to the end of this scene in the school. Yeah. Okay. Maman. Pan had never felt fear like this before. Not even her first time in the engine, sinking into the infernal blackness of the pit and not knowing whether she'd make it out alive. Not the first time she'd seen it, the creature that lived inside the machine, the one that craved her soul. Not the first time she'd seen the demons hefting their bulk from the shattered remains of the world they possessed. Not even when she was a kid, watching her parents arguing, seeing her drunken father bunch up his fist and unleash his fury on her and her mother. This fear was something else, something so unfamiliar that it was almost alien. It was a physical thing, a cold fire inside her stomach, a painful tickle like somebody's dirty fingers were burrowing between her vertebrae. Her head was a mess of white noise. He was coming. She forced herself to put one foot in front of the other, but even that was a struggle. Her body, her mind, was on the verge of a complete breakdown. All it wanted to do was lie down and die, because anything, literally anything, was better than seeing him. Her vision went dark, hallucinations of mouldering flesh flashing up against the ruin of the corridor. She tried to ignore them. Ostheim had warned her it would be like this, if she was ever close to one of the five. The Pentarchy were freaks, monsters who had used the engine too many times. They weren't human, not anymore. They weren't engineered, and they weren't demons. They were something horrific that lay in between. And Mammon was the worst, a force of utter wickedness who corrupted everything he touched. All he had to do was smile at you, Ostheim said, and your soul would rot. Mammon. Just thinking his name made the corridor shake more violently, the floor vibrating so hard that she almost lost her footing. She braced herself against the wall, screaming when she felt something soft and wet there, something moving. The plaster was crumbling away, a solid mass of maggots squirming beneath like the building was made of them. She recoiled, watching as more of the facade fell away, unleashing a torrent of insects and spiders that poured to the floor. More dropped from the ceiling, pattering down onto her head like big, fat drops of rain. Something squirmed its way down the back of her suit and she almost gagged. It couldn't be real, and yet it was. The five made a mockery of physics. Pan! A voice behind her, but she was panicking too much to care who it was. Herc was barking into her ear, but the line was drenched in static. She ran, spiders crunching beneath her boots. The floor was growing soft, as if it was melting beneath the weight of so many moving bodies. Her feet began to stick, and she had the awful feeling that she was trapped inside a nightmare, that soon she'd be completely paralysed. This way! A hand under her arm, pulling her so hard that she was lifted off the ground, swung towards the window. It was Truck, with Brianna unconscious over one shoulder. A bead of blood wound its way down from his eye. Move, Pan! He gave her a shove that almost catapulted her through the broken glass. She jumped onto the dying grass. It was too hot out here, the paint on the window frames blistering. Somebody was screaming close by, an unbearable, endless shriek. She didn't blame them, whoever they were. The world was literally crumbling, dissolving. The school building was falling into pieces around them, bricks toppling from the tower, walls caving in like cardboard in a rainstorm. The ground was changing, creatures that might have been worms or leeches oozing up from the grass, from the soil, even from the concrete, wriggling pathetically as they roasted. Pan! Something said her name, and the force of it almost knocked her to her knees. The word conjured up more visions of dead things, cadavers that lifted their skeletal fingers to point at her. She recognised her dead, the ones that she had killed or left to die, and she covered her face with her hands. It was too much. It was too much. A hand on her back, guiding her. She opened her eyes to see Marlowe there and his friend. They ran, soft bodies erupting into pus beneath their feet. They turned the corner of the school, now nothing more than a column of crumbling brick, to see Herc there, standing beside the van, waving them on. "Do you want to die?" he yelled, and there was a madness in his eyes, a lunatic terror that was somehow even worse than her own fear. "Why are you running, Pan?" His voice, Mammon's, injected into her ears by a long, sharp needle. It was disjointed, the voice changing pitch from an adult's to a child's, a man's to a woman's, like 100 people were speaking to her at once. "We have so much to talk about, you and I." "No," she said, digging her fingers into her temples. The pain was good, better to have a head full of agony than a head full of him. "Ignore it," said Herc, running forward. He and Marlowe hefted her into the van and she collapsed into a seat. The vehicle was shaking, the whole street rattling. "Get in, now!" Herc bellowed, waiting for the others to scramble inside before sliding the door shut. He jammed his foot on the gas and the vehicle lurched, the tyres screaming on the asphalt. The van didn't budge. "There's no need to hurry," said the voice, louder now, like it was whispering into her ear. Pan had to swivel around in her chair to make sure Maman wasn't right behind her. She was almost relieved until she looked out of the rear window. The street that led up to the school was changing, widening, like an invisible force was pushing the buildings to one side. No, not an invisible force. She could see something there in the centre of it all, a ball of blinding darkness that ground slowly up the street. There was a silhouette inside it, the vague shape of a man. And even though his face was obscured by impossible light, she could still see it, burning into her retinas. a cruel face, a joker's grin, and 2 lunatic black eyes overflowing like toppled ink pots. "There's nowhere to run," he said, that voice like a record being played at the wrong speed. "Come to me, I have so much to offer you." "Herc," she said, tasting blood in her mouth, "we need to go now." "Take off the parking brake," Truck boomed, the van shaking but still rooted to the ground as the tyres spun. "It's off," yelled Herc. He was crying, his foot stamping on the gas like he was trying to kick a hole through the bottom of the van. He swore, smashing his hands on the steering wheel. Pan looked back. Clouds of black smoke plumed upwards from the burning tyres, but through them she could see Mammon, so much closer now, hauling himself up the street like a leviathan. The buildings seemed to step out of his way, as if they would rather shake themselves into oblivion than block his path. Windows shattered, bricks exploding as they were forced sideward. The sidewalk shaking to dust and rippling like water. The sight made Pan think of an icebreaker shattering its way through reality. "There is nothing I can't do," he said. And there were sounds in her head, somebody licking their lips, a burst of insane laughter, a scream, a baby crying, all played at once, like some sadistic soundtrack, threatening to deafen her. "There is no need to run." "Herc, please get this van moving," she said. The engine was howling, threatening to blow. Through the back windshield, Mammon was closer, that orb of light taking up the entire street. Somebody ran past the van, bumping into them, then staggering off into a cloud of dust. He had no eyes, Pan saw, just 2 holes in his head where they'd been gouged away. She looked around her, saw the terror inside the van, Marlowe and the other boy clawing at their own faces, trying to get Mammon out of their heads. Knight was curled up into a ball beneath one of the chairs, sobbing. Truck was sitting there, looking like he was about to have an aneurysm, his eyes bulging, blood dripping from both of them. "Herc, please," she said. Because if they didn't start moving, then Mammon would be on them, and it would all be over. Ostheim was right. He could rip their souls apart with a touch. Send them to the deepest, darkest parts of hell. Compared to him, the demons were old friends, almost gentle in their mindlessness. Mammon was pure, undiluted evil. Pan realised she was crying. "Please, Herc, I can't stand it." "I am your saviour, Pan. You may not know it yet, but you will. You will come to me." "No, no," she screamed into her hands, clutching her face and wishing for them to move. She heard feet, felt something pull at the harness on her back. When she opened her eyes, she saw Marley there, fumbling with her crossbow. He pushed past her, using the butt of the weapon to smash a hole in the rear windshield. Then he thrust the bow through, taking aim. He was too low. It would fall short. She reached out, slapping his arm up just as he took the shot. The bolt soared out and up, looking for a second like it was going wide. Then it punched through Mammon's bubble. Just a sliver of iron, no bigger than a pen. But the metal had been harvested from the engine itself, and it was powerful. There was a sudden flare of negative light, everything going black, like the sun had been turned inside out. The van lurched forwards, throwing Pan off her chair and into Marlowe. Both of them crumpled into a heap. The acceleration took her breath away, and she held onto him as they skidded around a corner, then another, the van groaning as it shunted smaller vehicles out of the way. "You can't run forever," said Mammon, 100 voices screaming from a madhouse. "I will find you." They barreled around another corner, and the voice faded, burned up by a burst of static. "I will find you, and you will burn." She burrowed her face into Marlowe's chest, felt his arms locked tight around her, his chest heaving, wheezing, both of them sobbing into each other as they left the madness behind. That voice, just an unbearable, whispered echo in the very centre of her brain. "You will burn." There we go, Mammon. Okay, so the next chapter is called Fresh Kills. There's only 2 more chapters in the first part of this book. So hopefully I'll be back soon. Nearly finished the first part. There's 3 parts in this book, all about the same kind of size. So yeah, we're almost a third of the way through it. I hope you enjoyed that. That's one of my favourite scenes. I loved that scene when I was writing it. Just the sheer horror of what was happening in the school and the superpowers involved, the porter who can teleport, the mind reader who can make you do anything just by thinking it. and yeah, just stuff like that, which is always really good fun to write. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're having a lovely summer, and yeah, I will be back very soon. Hopefully after I've had a haircut, and yeah, I will see you then. Okay, bye.